Hey everybody, and welcome to week one, part one of our series, You in 5 Years. My name is Josh, I'm the lead pastor here at Centerpoint Church, and I want to thank you for joining us today. Now, as we start a new year, inevitably people start to make New Year's resolutions, and as the page turns from 2021 to 2022, most people inevitably start making goals. And I would dare suggest that people don't think big enough when they think about their goals. Now, when I say that, you're probably going, well, what do you mean? Like we should go even larger in a 1 year span? We should shoot for the stars? And that's not quite what I'm saying. Here's what I'm actually saying is that I think people underestimate what they can accomplish over the long term, like over a 5 year span, and they overestimate what they can accomplish in the short term. They underestimate what they can accomplish in the long term and overestimate what they can accomplish in the short term. And the problem here is that we have tragically short attention spans, that we create these massive goals that we're going to bring big change and the year is going to be different. And then all of a sudden something else grabs our attention, or things become difficult, or we just simply lose focus, or we lose energy, or another thing happens culturally or societally that gets us off track, and we move on to the next thing so quickly. Whereas short, small steps over the long period of time, easy daily things that we put into the rhythms of our life can have massive implications long term. And this is simply true of the vocation in which I'm in. Many pastors and leaders in North America lead pastors or associate pastors last about 3 years. And then for those who are in youth ministry, they last just 2 years. And much of this has to do with longevity, right? And this idea that we want to see short-term things happen, but it takes long-term plays to see connection with the community, or to see an impact long-term with a group of people or a community around us. And this doesn't happen overnight, but the more short-sighted we become and we lose vision of the long-term goals in our life, or the long-term impact that we can have, the harder it is to keep our feet moving. And this is the same when it comes to relationships in our life, or different situations that we've faced. We overestimate what we can accomplish in just 1 year. We can do it, and we almost want to do it so quickly because then it just is easier that way. And then we underestimate the fact that those little choices, those little decisions that we make over and over and over again throughout our day or throughout our month on a daily basis, that over years they compound, and eventually they can bring about incredible success and tangible results in our life. But it's not a quick fix. And so here's what we're going to do. We're not just going to think about the next 12 months. What I want to do is go bigger than that and think about the next 60 months, next 5 years. And to think bigger, to think long term. Who could we be? Not just in 2022, by the end of 2022, but who could we be by 2027? Like, if we get after it, if we give it all we've got, if we trust God, whose ways are higher than our ways, who's bigger than us, who's with us, what could we accomplish 60 months from now? And that's the question that I want embedded in our hearts and in our minds as we go throughout the series. You in 5 years. Now just think about this. There's positive and negative things that we can accomplish in the next 5 years. And some of them are pretty big. And we're going to start with a positive because we're starting on a positive note in 2022. And then we're going to head towards the negatives. But some of the positive things that we can accomplish in a 5 year span is becoming fluent in another language. This Christmas, we actually sat with a family, Destiny and I, we sat with a family that was from Germany. And it was awesome. We loved to hang out with them. And I remember when they first immigrated to Canada, that English was their second language. And in particular, there was one individual in the family that didn't have a very great vocabulary. It was amazing to me that on Christmas Eve, and I want to celebrate this, that we were speaking together fluently in English, laughing and joking just after a few short years. It's amazing. In the next 5 years, you could be fluent in a new language. You could accomplish a degree, BA, MA, a doctorate, diploma. You could master a sport. You could own, and I know this is a big one, a house. You could pay off that debt. Teenagers, I want to talk to you for just a minute. Because over the next 5 years, say you're 13, I see a lot of teenagers walking around with iPhones, which, whatever, that's cool. But a brand new iPhone, typically new iPhone's bought almost every year. And I see a lot of teenagers buying phones every year. They're about $1,200 for a brand new iPhone, $1,200. Now that's about $100 a month, okay? Now I just want you to imagine with me for a moment this scenario, because some positive things can happen out of the next 5 years. Say you're 13 and you begin to save $100 a month for the next 5 years. Okay, so that's going to accumulate to $6,000 by the time you're 18. Now, if you put that $6,000 in a bank account and are in the stock market, which on average, if you put it in larger funds over 10 years and over has 10% annual interest, and you put it in there from the age of 18 to 65, you'll have twice the amount that somebody who's 65 as a Canadian retires with. In other words, an average person retires with just under $320,000 in the bank when they retire. If you just left that money at the age of 18 over the next 5 years, if you're 13 and you just left that money in, you build it up for the next 5 years, you left it in until the age of 65, you'd have over $640,000 to your name. And that's the power of small decisions over a period of time that over the long haul can have significant compounding results. You could read 60 books, one a month, which is basically six pages a day, which takes about 5 minutes. The average book is about 200 pages. You could accomplish the reading of 60 books. You could radically transform your soul. And in the desire to know God deeper, or to, if you're on a journey of faith and you're trying to figure all this out, in the next 5 years, you can have an incredible, robust faith life. Accomplishing the reading of the Bible, or taking courses, or doing Starting Point, or getting involved in a small group, leading a small group, and then being able to lead leaders of small groups. It's incredible what you can accomplish over a 5-year period of time in a positive way. But not just positively are we talking, but also negatively. We could have negative outcomes in the next 5 years. For instance, 5 years from now, you could still be going through the final steps of a divorce. Maybe you neglected a spouse, or maybe you just didn't take time. And I know every scenario is different. But over the next 5 years, you could just unintentionally, or just not invest in your relationship with your spouse. And this could be what takes place in the next 5 years. 5 years is a period of time to get addicted to drugs or something else in a life-threatening way. 5 years is long enough to have worked 5, 6, or 7 different jobs that you partially applied yourself to, and you got fired, or you moved on. 5 years is long enough to rack up a mountain of credit card debt, to pack on an extra 30 pounds, to smoke 336,500 cigarettes, which is a pack a day for the next 5 years. And you're like, I can't believe he brought it up, smoking. I knew he'd do that. He's one of those kind of pastors. No, I'm just saying over the next 5 years, these are the things negatively that can impact our life. And the reality is that positively or negatively, if we don't intentionally begin to make steps in our life, we will have unintentional consequences that may be positive, but for the most part, if we're not careful, may have huge negative implications for our life. And so what we want to do in this series, and what I want to help you with in this series, is get a vision of what we could accomplish, thinking big in the next 5 years. What could you accomplish positively in the next 5 years of your life? As we start this brand new series, we're going to start with this idea. Is what you let in become the ways you are set in? What you let in become the ways you are set in. And we all have ways. God has his ways, and we have ours. Within the biblical text, we read that God's ways are higher than our ways. As high above the heavens are from the earth, so God's ways are above our ways. But you also have ways, and I have ways too. And our ways are how we choose to react, or the ways that we choose to speak, or the ways that we choose to insert ourselves or remove ourselves from certain situations. Our ways are the ways that we accept or we decline, or the ways that we stay or we go. Our passions, our checking account speaks of your ways and my ways. My text message history, my search history speak of my ways. You have your ways and I have mine. And many of the ways that we have were modeled to us by our parents or significant influencers in our life. The way that we do conflict might be the way that we saw our mom do conflict, or the way that we handle money might be the way our father handled money. Or the way that we watch that show on TV, the show we watch on TV is the way in which we live our life. That's how it was modeled on Instagram or on YouTube or Facebook, and so we implemented it into our life. And what I'm trying to do is caution you that the ways you let in, the things you let into your life will eventually make their way out and could potentially set themselves into your life. And then you get stuck with those decisions. But the good news is in series like this, we can talk about getting unstuck. Actually, there's a guy named Paul. He wrote the majority of the New Testament books that we find in our New Testament. And Paul in the book of Romans actually speaks about the time that we have and how we utilize the time that we have. Paul wants us to understand that when we live intentionally and we wake up to the opportunities that we have today, that we can see a significant change in our life. But it comes with us taking responsibility and from making those changes by partnering with God. And so Paul writes to a church in Rome, and this book is called the Book of Romans. And in chapter 13, he's going to unpack for us how we can begin to think about the future and how we should look at our present time. How we should look as we enter 2022, as we think about the future, but also how we frame our present reality. And he's going to teach us the importance of a certain principle about compounding interest. And we're going to get that in just a moment. But let's head right now to the text. And this is what Paul writes. He says, "Do this, understanding the present time. The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber." In other words, some of you are kind of falling asleep at the wheel of the opportunities that are ahead of you. You're letting them pass you by. And Paul is saying here, it's time for us to wake up. And then he continues, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. Our salvation, big word, I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, is nearer now than when we first believed. What do you mean it's nearer now? This is what Paul is trying to explain to us. And there's three different aspects of what this word salvation. And salvation is God's rescue plan for us and in the person of Jesus. Now, at the very beginning of this journey of salvation, we put our faith, we put our trust in Jesus. This is called justification. And it means that we are forgiven because we put our faith in God. And our mission here at Centerpoint Church is to inspire people to follow Jesus. And so this is the decision that we make to follow Jesus, and we receive forgiveness. Now, at the end of our life, there's a big word called glorification. And this is the time that when we die, that in the Christian faith that we believe that we go to be with Jesus. And this is glorification. And the reason I bring this up is that there's an in between those two ideas. There's justification, glorification, one more big ification word, okay? And it's sanctification in the middle. And this is the process of God doing work in us. Or if you're figuring out who Jesus is and you're on this faith journey, It's a process that a Christian uses to become more like Jesus and to see the Jesus realities become alive in our lives. And Paul is saying here, but be careful not to just fall asleep and kind of flow downstream. Instead, Paul is going to talk about us awakening to a different reality. Now, there's a few different versions that we find in the Bible. And the reason for that is that the Bible is written in 3 different languages originally: Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. Now, when it comes to what we're reading today, the majority of the New Testament is in Greek. And so there's different translations into English. Some translations are literally word for word, and others are more of a paraphrase of what the original intention of the writing was. Now, again, every language has its limitations. And so again, translating from Greek to English would have its limitations. And so one of the different versions of the English New Testament that we have is a version called the Message. And this is what the Message version talks about when, or unpacks as Paul is talking about in Romans 13 and these words that we just wrote. It says this: but make sure, it's the same text, but just a different way of wording it. Make sure that you don't get so absorbed and exhausted. Now, I just want to talk about those words for a minute. Because when I hear it, absorbed, it's like so lost in your current reality that you can't see anything else. Now, I'm already convicted as I hear that, but then he also says this: absorbed and exhausted. The idea of slumber is that you work so hard that you just fell asleep to the current realities of what you're facing. He says, don't get absorbed and exhausted in taking care of all your day-to-day obligations, that you lose track of the time and you doze off, oblivious to God. The night is about over. Dawn is about to break. Be up and awake to what God is doing. What is he doing? Well, Paul doesn't leave us hanging. And this is what Paul says that God is doing. God is putting the final touches on the salvation. Like I said, that thing that we're working out to see Jesus realities in our life. So final touches on the salvation work he began when we first believed. In other words, God wants to continue to produce things in our life that are going to bring joy to us and happiness, a completeness, that bring about better realities than what we're currently facing. And then Paul continues and he says these words: we can't afford to waste a minute and must not squander these precious, I love that word, precious daylight hours in frivolity and indulgence, in sleeping around and dissipation, in bickering and grabbing everything in sight. Other translations say jealousy. Get out of bed and get dressed. Don't loiter and linger. And doesn't that describe life for many? Loitering and laying around. I don't know, just kind of hanging about. And Paul's saying, don't loiter and linger here. There's precious daylight hours. And he's using this idea of day and night. And this is what he means by it, is daylight are these hours that we have breath in our lungs, that our heart is still beating, that there's still opportunity. The daylight hours. And then there's the night, which is our inevitable end. And what Paul is saying here, that we can always keep saying, I'm going to serve God when I'm older. I'm going to take my faith seriously when I get down the road. I'm going to have fun when I'm young. This is when I'm free. I want to just go out. I want to just do my thing. I want to see the world, experience all that it has to offer. Or maybe I'll just watch on the sidelines and just kind of figure it out and burn a few years and eventually get it right. But I just want to say, and I think Paul would say, that don't waste the time you have. And then he says these words: dress yourselves in Christ and be up and about. In other words, it's not just time to wake up, but it's time to take responsibility. It's time to take responsibility for your faith, or maybe take that next step of faith, now is the time to dress yourself, to be up and about. And for some of you that may be young, maybe you're a teenager or a young adult, and for many years your faith was maybe tied very closely to your parents. And now is the time for you to make your faith your own and to take seriously the next 5 years of your life, not just waiting, not just burning it, but in taking seriously what God has for you. Now, there's 3 things from this text that I think are important to highlight. And you might not see them at a first glance, but I think they're important to look at more closely. And the first thing that, as Paul says these words that jump off the page to me, the first thing is that time is not on our side. The Greek words for time are chronos and kairos. And chronos is just the generic usage of time, but kairos means strategic time or specific time. Like when you go to an event and it's from 7 to 10 p.m., there's a specific time it begins and a specific time it ends. Paul uses this language of day and night. The dawn is about to break. He's referring to the end of life, that there is a certain window of time that we all have, and it will not last forever. And the end is hurling like breakneck speed towards us. And your life seems so real right now, doesn't it? You're buying things, you're going out, you're driving your car without winter tires in the snow. I mean, you're double clicking on stuff on Instagram, but just before you know it, and nobody sees it coming, life can vanish so quickly and life can change so rapidly. And all those things that we felt like were just normal, all of a sudden can flip overnight. And you won't be on earth anymore. And you just said, well, I'm so thankful I came to church online today. But the reality is that when we understand that there's a seriousness of life, there's a brevity of life, it changes the way in which we live. Another book of the Bible, Psalms, which is in the Old Testament, it's a lot of poetry. It's an incredible book because it talks about there's a lot of honesty from the writers here towards God. And it gives those who are trying to figure out their faith journey or those who are maybe already following Jesus, it gives us a lot of license to be authentic in our expression. And I appreciate that about the book. But in Psalm 90, it puts it this way about how the psalmist here views life. He says this, our days may come to 70 years or 80, and if our strength endures, yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow. Oh my gosh. For they quickly pass, and we fly away. In other words, there will be a time that we die. And they teach us, God, to number our days. Why? That we may gain a heart of wisdom. And it's an understanding that life, it changes, and that there is a day that comes to an end that chooses us to live in the days that we have wisely. And some of you 17, 24, not me, I'm in the prime of my life, Josh. I get it, you're a pastor, you have to say these things, but it's amazing to me that in a blink a decade can be gone. And the longer you live, the faster it goes. Time is not on your side. Aristotle puts it this way, we should measure time in heart throbs. In other words, every beat of our heart reminds us that it is a gift that we have in the life that we have. 5 years, you might not have 5, you might have 3 or 6 months. Teach us, God, the brevity of life. But the second thing that I see in the text here is the future you is simply an exaggerated version of the current you. You know, we think about the future at certain times, about how romantic it is, right? We think about how 10 years down the road, we're going to be at X, Y, and Z, and it's going to be so much easier. It's going to be so much better. We're going to be kinder. Maybe at that point, we'll be more generous. Or at that time, we'll X, Y, and Z. It'll just magically happen. But the reality is, it's just an exaggerated you. All those decisions you're making today, decisions to be kind or cruel, to be generous or to withhold, those decisions to lean into your faith journey or lean out, to be in community or lean out, all those decisions will compound, and it will be an exaggerated version of where you're at. So if you want to grow to be a kinder person, kindness must be a part of your story today. It doesn't just happen through osmosis, it happens through the intentional day-to-day decisions that we make. For those who are seeking good and the good of others, and who are opening your home or encouraging with their words or being generous or with making sure that people, your family, that your small group, the people around you, that you're making sure that people are, that will compound, and down the road, you'll see evidence of that in your life. Now, the other side of that is if you're seeking trouble or evil, if you're the first person to point out the problems in a situation or the faults of everybody and how everyone can be better or how you're the most true and you're pushing people away, this will also exaggerate itself over time. And the comments, the statements, the emails, the text messages, the quips, the retorts, the little things you're shooting out, these things you snicker at, if you're looking for evil or perpetuating it, you're going to find trouble down the road. Pastor Greg Laurie puts it this way: the evening of life is determined by the morning of it. In other words, what we put into practice today will eventually reap down the road. The good news is, in a series like this, it's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late to soften your heart. It's never too late to ask for forgiveness. It's never too late to repent and turn around, or to stop living for the everyday and to begin to live for something bigger. Today, you can make changes. Remember, time is not on your side. A future you is simply an exaggerated version of the current you. And last, but definitely not least, and this is important, so I want you to lean into this, is ongoing consistency is much more important than short-term intensity. How do you want, you might be asking, what kind of outcome do you want from a message like this? Well, I would want to see measured determination. Not asking right away to push hard for something or make a list and just pick 4 things on it and go real hard, because that's a bit premature. It's more to grab an idea of the ongoing, steady, slow, measured consistency that allows you to tap into what has been called one of the most powerful forces in the universe, compound interest. Albert Einstein said it was the 8th wonder of the world. He who understands it, earns it. He who doesn't, pays it. And whether you're earning 20% or you're paying 20% comes down to whether you understand one of the most powerful forces in the universe, the power of steady consistency to build up and become strong over time, or the opposite. And if we want to grow in the next 5 years, if we want to grow into somebody who's more generous, we want to grow in our faith journey and our understanding of who God is, we want to pivot and gain that new skill, or we want to grow and have financial stability in our life, understand that it's small decisions every single day. We can have short bursts, but they're not nearly as effective as building habits over time. And even though we might want to be here and we feel over here is so small in comparison to where we want to be, we have to understand that it's in the middle. It's through that consistency. It's through the ongoing consistency that builds us to where we want to be. Maybe you say, well, I read the Bible once or for a week. It didn't quite work out the way I wanted. I already tried that. You mean I tried budgeting last month. It didn't really work, and so I just kind of let it go. Or, you know what, I prayed that one time and that's it. Or, you know what, I tried to have that relationship, or I tried to have it, but I just kind of let it go. And you would just wonder, like, is there a pill I can take, or can I pour hot water on it, or is there something that I can buy from Amazon, or is there a course I can take real quick, or a marriage conference I can go to that fix all of this? And the truth is that it's in the consistency. It's in the day-to-day, being intentional in our living, that compounds and over time leads to long-lasting change. And here's the thing. We can't jump from where we are to where we want to be without that consistency in time. This is why in the next 5 years, this conversation matters. And this is why when we talk about the next 5 years, we have to understand that it's not an overnight microwaved way. But if we start small and realize the power of ongoing consistency, change can be made and be sustained. As C.S. Lewis wrote, that good and evil both increased at compounding interest. Both lists mushroom out of control. And that is why the smallest decisions we make in every area have infinite importance. And so today, as we start this series, and I want to encourage you to come back next week as we continue to talk about how we can make lasting transformation in the next 5 years in our life, that we need to begin and understand that it starts today. It starts small with consistency, and over time, it builds into something that we desire in our life and ultimately that God desires for us. We're going to end here today. I'm going to pray, and we're going to pick up right there next week as we continue part 2. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for today, that you've put these ideas in place. That God, you can build something great even from places in our life that we don't know how to build and move forward on. But God, you have wisdom, and your ways are above our ways. So help us understand, God, how to take our next steps. Help us understand this idea of compounding interest, small decisions over a long period of time that bring about lasting, ongoing change. God, we trust you, and we ask that you would encourage us as we take these steps. Bring to mind areas for people within our church and for those watching online today. Bring to mind, God, different areas of our life that you can use, that you want to us even grow in, that we might become the people you desire us to be. God, we ask for your help, your guidance, and your wisdom. We thank you for this. Amen. Thanks so much for joining us today for part 1 of our series, You in 5 Years. I can't wait for next week as we continue in part 2. I'll see you then. Here is Carla with the Post.